Before the Underground Railroad had a name, there was another escape route. It ran south, not north. It did not lead to Canada. It led to the swamps and jungles of Spanish Florida. There, escaped slaves did not just hide. They built towns. They raised armies. They fought the United States military for over 50 years through 3 separate wars and were never fully conquered. They were called the Black Seminoles, and they are arguably the most formidable community of freedom fighters in American history. 3 of their warriors won the Congressional Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration, in a single battle. Their guerrilla tactics were so effective that the United States spent more money fighting them than any other Indian war in American history. When America finally pushed them out of Florida, some of them did not go to reservations. They went to Mexico, where their descendants live free to this day. You were taught about Harriet Tubman. You were taught about Frederick Douglass. You were never taught about the Black Seminoles. Today you are going to find out why. I have started a WhatsApp channel where I share the history YouTube suppresses. The link is in the pinned comment. Join now. This is one of the greatest untold stories of Black resistance in American history. Most people think the Underground Railroad only went north, toward Canada, toward freedom in the cold. But the first Underground Railroad in American history ran in the opposite direction, south into Spanish Florida. As early as 1686, enslaved people from the rice plantations of South Carolina and Georgia began escaping south. They crossed rivers. They dodged slave hunters through dangerous territory. And when they crossed the St. Mary's River, the border between British and Spanish colonial land, they entered a different world. Spain had a policy that Britain did not. In 1693, the Spanish crown issued an edict. Any enslaved person who reached Florida and agreed to convert to Catholicism and defend the Spanish settlement would be granted full legal freedom. Not conditional freedom, not indentured servitude, full freedom. Escaped slaves poured in. By 1738, they had built something that should be in every American history textbook, but is not. They established a fortified town called Gracia Real de Santa Teresa de Mose, known as Fort Mose, just north of St. Augustine. Fort Mose was the first legally sanctioned free Black town in North America. Over 100 formerly enslaved men and women built a walled settlement with their own homes, their own farms, and their own militia. They answered to Spain, but they governed themselves. This was 40 years before the American Revolution. It was nearly a century before the Emancipation Proclamation. Formerly enslaved Africans had already built a free, armed, self-governing community on American soil. But Fort Mose was just the beginning. Deeper in the Florida wilderness, the escaped slaves were building something even more powerful, an alliance that would terrify the United States for the next half century. As more and more enslaved people fled south into Florida, they encountered another group of outcasts. The Seminoles were a loose confederation of Native American peoples who had broken away from the Creek Nation and migrated into the peninsula. The word Seminole itself comes from the Spanish word cimarron, meaning wild or runaway. Runaways meeting runaways. They recognized each other immediately. The Black escapees and the Seminoles formed an alliance unlike anything else in North American history. Many of the escaped Africans were Gullah people from the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia. They brought knowledge of tropical agriculture, rice cultivation, and English language skills. The Seminoles brought territorial knowledge, political structure, and military tradition. Together, they became more powerful than either could have been alone. The Black Seminoles lived in their own villages near Seminole towns. They had their own leaders, their own political systems, and their own armed militias. They maintained African traditions, Gullah language, African spiritual practices, and rice-based agriculture, while adopting Seminole clothing, customs, and military tactics. Some paid tribute to Seminole chiefs. Some held positions of real power. A man named Abraham, a formerly enslaved man who had escaped from a Pensacola doctor, rose to become the chief interpreter and legal advisor to Seminole leader Micanopy. He negotiated directly with American generals and politicians. American generals who visited the Black Seminole settlements described them with a mixture of respect and terror. General Edmund Pendleton Gaines called the Black Seminoles vassals and allies of the Seminoles. Other officers noted that the black settlements were well organized, well armed, and fiercely independent. By the 1830s, an estimated 1,200 black people lived in or near Seminole towns across Florida. The slaveholders of Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama were furious because every enslaved person who successfully escaped to Florida and joined the Seminoles sent a message back to the plantations: freedom is possible. The Black Seminoles were not just a community, they were a beacon, and the slaveholding South wanted that beacon destroyed. If what you are hearing is new to you, join our WhatsApp channel. I go deeper there with the stories nobody else will tell. The link is in the pinned comment. Tap it now. What followed was 3 separate wars. The First Seminole War in 1818, the Second Seminole War from 1835 to 1842, and the third from 1855 to 1858. Combined, they became the longest, most expensive, and most deadly Indian wars in American history. And the Black Seminoles were at the heart of all 3. In 1816, before the wars even officially began, the United States attacked a position called Negro Fort on the Apalachicola River. The fort was manned by approximately 320 black men, women, and children who had been formerly enslaved and who had armed themselves with weapons left behind by the British. A single cannon shot from an American gunboat hit the fort's ammunition magazine. The explosion killed 270 of the 320 people inside, one of the deadliest single acts of violence against black people in American history. And it was committed by the United States military against people whose only crime was being free. 2 years later, Andrew Jackson invaded Florida. The First Seminole War was as much about destroying black freedom as it was about claiming territory. Jackson burned black Seminole villages, he captured and re-enslaved black families, and he set the stage for what would come next. The Second Seminole War, from 1835 to 1842, was the real war. It began with a moment that should be legendary in black history. On December 28, 1835, 180 Seminole warriors ambushed a column of 108 American soldiers in what became known as the Dade Massacre. The soldiers hastily built a barricade and held out for hours. Then the sound of hooves broke through the gunfire. 50 black horsemen charged the barricade, warriors from a nearby Black Seminole settlement who had heard the battle and rode in to finish it. They overran the position. 105 of the 108 soldiers were killed. Only 3 survived. For 7 years after that, the Black Seminoles and the Seminoles waged a guerrilla war that humiliated the United States Army. They fought in swamps and jungles that American soldiers could not navigate. They used hit-and-run tactics that conventional forces could not counter. Over 1,500 American soldiers died, more than any other Indian conflict in U.S. history. The war cost the federal government over $40 million, an astronomical sum at the time. The Black Seminoles fought with a ferocity that American generals noted was different from the native Seminoles. The reason was simple. The Seminoles were fighting for land. The Black Seminoles were fighting for their very existence. If they lost, they would not be relocated. They would be re-enslaved. Every battle was a battle for freedom itself. General Thomas Jessup, the commander of American forces, eventually tried to split the alliance by offering the Black Seminoles their freedom if they surrendered separately from the Seminoles. Some did, but many refused. The alliance held long enough that the United States was forced to make concessions it had never planned to make. The Black Seminoles were never fully conquered. They were pushed out of Florida, some to Oklahoma, some to the Bahamas, some to Mexico. But they were never broken. After removal from Florida, a group of Black Seminoles led by a warrior named John Horse, alongside Seminole Chief Wildcat, made a decision that changed their history forever. Rather than submit to the reservation system in Oklahoma, where slaveholders were already trying to re-enslave Black Seminoles, they marched south, all the way to Mexico. The Mexican government, which had abolished slavery in 1829, offered them land near the Texas border in exchange for protecting frontier settlements from Comanche and Apache raids. The Black Seminoles established a community called El Moral in the state of Coahuila. Their descendants, known as the Muskogos, still live there today, free, on their own land, speaking a Creole language that blends English, Spanish, Gula, and Muskogee. American slaveholders were enraged. They sent raiders across the border to try to capture and re-enslave the Black Seminoles in Mexico. Mexico refused to surrender them. The freedom that the United States denied them, but Mexico guaranteed. Then in 1870, the U.S. Army came calling again, but this time with an offer. The military invited Black Seminoles from Mexico to return to Texas and serve as scouts. The Seminole, Negro Indian Scouts became one of the most effective frontier units in Army history. And in 1875, three of them, Sergeant John Ward, Private Pompey Factor, and Trumpeter Isaac Payne, won the Congressional Medal of Honor in a single battle against Comanche warriors on the Pecos River. 3 Black Seminole Scouts, 3 Medals of Honor in one engagement, for a people who had spent 50 years fighting the very army they now served. Their descendants in Texas fought for decades to receive the land and benefits the Army had promised them. Most never received them, but the Black Seminole communities in Brackettville, Texas, in Del Rio, in Nacimiento, Mexico, and on Andros Island in the Bahamas are still there, still carrying the names, still telling the stories, still free. The Black Seminoles escaped slavery and ran south, not north. They built the first free black town in North America nearly a century before the Civil War. They forged an alliance with the Seminoles that became the most effective resistance movement against American expansion in history. They fought 3 wars over 50 years. They killed 1,500 American soldiers. They cost the government $40 million. They were never fully defeated. And then, when they were pushed out of Florida, some of them walked to Mexico and built a free community that still exists today. And 3 of their warriors won the Congressional Medal of Honor in a single battle. This is not a footnote. This is one of the greatest stories of black resistance ever recorded. And you were never taught it. Not in school, not in church, not in any movie or documentary you have ever seen. Ask yourself why. Ask yourself what it would mean if every black child in America grew up knowing that their ancestors did not just endure slavery. Some of them escaped, built armies, fought empires, and won. Because that is not the history of victims. That is the history of warriors, and it is yours. Share this video with everyone. Send it to someone who needs to hear this story. The Black Seminoles refuse to be forgotten, and so should we. Subscribe, hit like, drop a comment, and tell me. Had you ever heard of the Black Seminoles before today? I already know the answer for most of you, and that's exactly why this video had to be made. I'll see you in the next one.